Alright, so we're back in Maya, and today we're reviewing how to go beyond just colors and add textures. And to do that, we're going to need to get into our UV editor. So first things first, I'm going to go back into object mode, clicking with two fingers, object mode in the top right, selecting my whole object, and I am going to go to UV and UV editor, my first option. Now make sure that you have your house or whatever object you're working on selected so that it will actually show up in the UV editor. If the UV editor is blank, it might be because you don't have your house selected, or it could be because you have it selected in the wrong mode. But if it's selected in object mode, we should see something that looks like this. Now some areas are pretty easy to identify, like this square down here clearly represents my doorway right here and the front of the house. Other areas might be a little bit trickier to figure out, especially with the layout that we have right now. One way to start narrowing this down, if I click with two fingers in my UV editor, I can go into face mode, and I can select individual faces, and I'll see things like this big square right here is actually just representative of this little inside of the doorway, which you might not have expected. And if we want to see how a texture would look on our house, it's important to go right up here and click on this little checker map. It looks like a checkerboard. And if we click on this checker map, we'll see how a texture would look. Meaning if I put a drawing of the front of a house with a door and windows right here on my house, it would show up right here. And honestly, that would look pretty good. Now, if I tried to put a pattern for bricks onto my chimney, you can see how stretched out these squares are. My bricks would also look very stretched out, not very realistic, not very good. So we'd have to fix that in our UV editor. And over here on the roof, you really can't even make out the pattern at this point. I'm going to try zooming in, but yeah, I really can't make out anything here because this must be so stretched or so squished that we can't even tell what's happening with those checkers. So that's not a good sign either. But remember, one of the fastest ways to get your UVs looking better on your object is to simply, with your object selected in object mode, go to UV and automatic. And now we can see that our shapes are laid out in a much more specific way that help us see where each piece is, what it's painted on, and how we could paint something new on this to make this look more like a house with textures. So let's do something easy like the chimney real quick. If I zoom in on the chimney here, so what the automatic layout we can see has done a pretty darn good job of is making all of these faces have a nice even checkerboard on them. The one thing that you might notice is there's a little bit of a gap in between these shapes that it made, and it's resulting in, at the edges here, not a perfect seam. There's kind of a gap over here between these shapes, and that results in edges that don't really line up. So if I had a brick texture wrapping around this, it might look like the bricks just kind of arbitrarily stop and then start again and don't really belong to the same object. There's a pretty easy way to fix this. I'm going to go over here into my UV editor, and I'm going to do my two-finger click and select edge mode. Now you can see when I select this edge right here, it's also highlighting another edge a little over to the right. So these two edges are supposed to be sharing the exact same space, but they're not. And that's why you get this kind of disconnect over here. So to fix this, I select one of those edges, I go to cut and sew, and then down to move and sew. And that will connect those two edges together. So again, if I select this edge right here, the one that we're looking at in our scene view right now, I can see that this edge exists in two places at once, so I want to cut and sew and move and sew until those become one object that are all together. One more cut and sew, move and sew, and now all of these are perfectly aligned. You can see that even this letter U connects across and around, and this is going to create an overall much better looking section of my house now that this is all sewn together and attaches pretty seamlessly. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole house like this because I don't want you to have to watch like a 40-minute video, but I am going to do a quick demonstration of, let's say we wanted to put a texture onto at least the chimney. How would we do that? instead of just a solid color? How can we put a texture on there in Maya? Well, the first thing we need to do is get back into object mode over here. So in my scene view, 2-finger click, object mode. If you want to, at this point, you can turn off the checkerboard so that we're looking at just our objects again. And I'm going to take my chimney, I'm going to kind of set it here on its own. I know where it is in my UV layout, I know what it looks like. I know if I want to put bricks on my chimney, this is where I'm going to put them. So now, making sure that I'm in object mode with my house selected, I'm going to, in my UV editor, click on this little camera icon right here. After clicking on that, we bring up our UV snapshot options. At least the first time that you do this, there's some really important options that we need to change, such as the image format. Right now, it's a Maya IFF. Nothing other than Maya knows what to do with a Maya IF. So we want to export this as a PNG. The other thing we want to do is make sure that we know where we're saving it. So right now this is going to my documents, Maya projects, default images. It's kind of a difficult place to find. So let's put this somewhere easier to find. If you want to, you can just put this onto your desktop. So I'm going to tell it to go to the desktop and I'm going to call it House UV, and maybe I'll call this House UV 01 in case I make more than one of these. It's a good way to keep things organized. Now, we've really done everything that we need. You might also, though, want to change this edge color. That means the edges in your UV layout, when you send them into Photoshop, what are they going to look like? Right now, they'll be white, which is going to be kind of hard to see. So a lot of times I'll make this something easier to see, like maybe a really dark or bright red, something like that. All right, with all of that done, I can simply hit Apply and Close. And after hitting Apply and Close, I should see a white picture with whatever name I gave it during my UV snapshot settings. So now you can control-click this, hover on Open With, and go to Adobe Photoshop. Alternatively, you can just go find Photoshop in your applications and open it up and drag this in, but this is a good way to get started. Now here's my layout. It is a little bit difficult to look at, but there's where my chimney belongs. If you want to make this easier to see what you're doing, a lot of times my first step when working on a UV is to simply click on this layer fill icon down here. It looks like a circle that's filled in on one side and empty on the other. Go up to the top option, which is solid color, and pick something like, if my outline is this dark red color, if I do like a light gray, and then put this color fill behind that. All right, now I can see my lines much more easily. And this here represents my chimney. So if I want to go find a texture, like I'll simply go and Google for brick texture, seamless HD. Now I want to open the full version of the image. I don't want to use the thumbnail. And I will save that image out to my desktop or my downloads. Just get the image off of the internet and onto your computer. And then you can scale, stretch, tile your image however you need to make it match up with your UV layout. In this case, I'm going to do a little bit of scaling and then tile it so that it doesn't look too stretched out. With my brick texture laid out and tiled over the UV of my chimney, it's time to save this. So I'm going to save as, and this is important that I save as because I need to change this back into a PNG. And I'll just call this House UV Texture because I actually have a texture on it now. Now with that saved, I can see it here on my desktop. Jumping back into Maya one more time, let's 2-finger click and go down to Assign New Material. I'll just select a new Lambert to bring up my options. And this time, where it says color, instead of clicking on the color, I will click to the right on this little checkerboard icon, which gives me more options, and I am going to tell this here that we are going to use a file. Bringing up a new option over here, now I need to tell it where to find that file. So I will go to my desktop, and I will find House UV Textured, and I should get a little preview of it. And when I hit open, this icon here is telling me that I am using my texture, but I don't see it right now because I need to hit one more little button. this little sphere here, this little circle that has a checkerboard on it, will show us the textures in our scene. And now, I've got a really nice looking brick texture laid out right where I put it. So take the time today to go around and at least get a texture on your chimney, and if time allows, try to get a texture on the roof, get some shingles, or get some texture on the walls, find some siding. And get as much done as you can. Spend about an hour making it look its absolute best possible. If you want to put more time in, that's great. But once you've got some textures on there, and they look pretty good, and you can prove it, take a good screenshot of it, and share it in the comments as always. Alright, good luck and have fun.